Welcome to Fight News Now Extra. My name is John Pollock, and this is where we get you caught up on all of the news happening today in mixed martial arts. As always, John Ramdian and Robin Black will be joining me, and today we're chatting an unlikely training partner for Quinton Jackson as he prepares for King Mo on Saturday. Daniel Cormier has some career advice for John Jones, and Matt Brown throws out the name he would like to fight next. Welterweight Matt Brown was a guest on the MMA Roasted podcast this week and said that the fight that most intrigues him after his win over Eric Silva is Nick Diaz. Brown spoke on the podcast that it would be a war between the two and the potential to be a legendary fight. Diaz has remained on the sidelines since his fight with George St. Pierre in March of 2013 at UFC 158 and recently stated that unless he receives a title fight, he would not fight for anything less than $500,000. As we look towards the UFC's return to Vancouver in June, the British Columbia Athletic Commission has followed suit with the Nevada State Athletic Commission and will not be issuing any therapeutic use exemptions for testosterone to any fighters on the card. After the NSAC's landmark ruling, there have been some commissions that have not outright banned the exemptions for testosterone, but are much more stringent on how they give them out. Daniel Cormier spoke to MMAJunkie.com ahead of his fight with Dan Henderson next weekend at UFC 173. The topic of John Jones inevitably came up in the discussion, with Cormier commenting on some of Jones' online antics towards critics. Cormier believes that most people dislike Jones because he comes across as presenting an act rather than the real individual, and if he wants to be an ass, he should go the whole way and embrace the persona, similar to Floyd Mayweather Jr., which has resulted in massive box office appeal. And Quinton Jackson returns to action on Saturday night for the Bellator light heavyweight tournament final against Muhammad King Mo Lawal. Jackson spoke with MMA Fighting's Luke Thomas and noted that former UFC Strikeforce and Dream competitor Jason Mayhem Miller has been working extensively with Jackson in preparing Rampage for the fight on Saturday night. Miller last fought in May of 2012 at UFC 146, where he was defeated by CB Dollaway and then was cut by the organization. Hey everyone, John Pollock here along with John Ramdian and Robin Black, and a couple of news items to tackle. First off, Matt Brown. He is throwing out the name Nick Diaz, which a ton of fans were as well, coming off of Saturday's performance against Eric Silva. On paper, sign me up, but that paper, I don't think Nick Diaz is going to be signing it anytime soon because there doesn't seem to be any common ground between the UFC and the Diaz brothers
That's
right now.
the default. It's like, okay, how do I make money and create interest? I'm just going to call out Nick Diaz, whether it's Matt Brown, Martin Kampmann, whoever. Nick Diaz is one of the most polarizing characters in all of mixed martial arts, and if you can somehow attach your name to this guy, it's going to create interest, and it's going to make you probably more money than you've ever made in MMA.
Yeah, Nick Diaz, I don't even know if he's polarizing anymore. He's just so fascinating. He's such a great fighter. He's such an interesting character. Him and Matt Brown is a fantastic fight. Like, it's absolutely fantastic. But like you mentioned, it's like Matt Brown will sign his name on it. He'll hand it to Nick Diaz, and he'll roll some green stuff up in it and smoke it. Like, I don't know that he's all that interested in fighting right now. Nick Diaz in interviews is like, yo, I'm ready to fight. But I don't know if he is. I don't know if that's really up his alley. He's so interesting, man. Like, he has talked at times about how he doesn't even really like fighting. It's a very painful and challenging and difficult thing. That's about as true as you can get.
I hear from so many different fighters, and the more I listen to Nick Diaz, the more, if you decode what he's saying, I think this guy understands it a lot more than most in the sport. I think so many people are thrown off by his delivery and they think it's all comedic. When you actually break down what this guy says and the fact that, listen, I want to make this amount of money, fighting is a business for me. I mean, this guy makes a whole lot of sense, and I can't necessarily fault him. He's taking the stand right now that how many fighters have the three of us heard off camera who will complain about these issues, and on camera, everything's perfect. It's Disney World 365 days a year. Nick Diaz isn't painting that picture publicly.
The luxury Nick Diaz also has is that he was a part of that California mixed martial arts scene, so he's seen MMA grow up, and he was already a part of the UFC, was released from the organization, so he knows how things work. Nick Diaz, like, you're introducing all these other rules. When I fought Robbie Lawler before, I didn't have to go on this big media tour, and I didn't have to jump through hoops. I just signed on the dotted line, and I fought. Now you're expecting me to do all these other things, and I know the UFC is like, well, you're going to make more money. He goes, but I'm not making more money. I understand if you really load my pockets, I'll do whatever you want. but I've never not shown up for a fight, and I've always entertained. And I think the problem is that the UFC just has to understand that Nick Diaz is one of these guys that is selling the tickets.
I agree, and they're not wolf tickets. No, sir, they're real tickets. And, man, Nick Diaz, he's fascinating. Pollock, you hit it bang on the head. I mean, the guy is saying some very intelligent things, and he did make some money in the George fight. I think depending on how Nick Diaz lives his life, and if all he's doing is hanging out smoking pot and playing with nunchucks, then, you know, he's not spending that much money. He might be able to live forever on it. As a fan of the sport and as a fan of the fighters, if this guy could make a change because of the things he says, we'd be so far behind him. But I don't know that he can. And as a fan of fighting and a fan of watching the greatest fighters perform, the one thing that Dana White says about Diaz that is very, very true is he only got a small window to do it. This is a great, great fighter. I do want to see him fight more.
The last thing I think anyone wants to see is, you know, a 40-year-old Nick Diaz and nothing to his name. A fantastic, talented fighter, but you're right, his earning potential is huge right now.
If you want to see something very cool, go to YouTube and watch Nick and Nathan Diaz battle it out with size. Worth seeing for sure.
All right, let's move on over to Saturday night. Bellator presents their very first pay-per-view. We talked earlier this week, Will Brooks in to fight Michael Chandler. We've got King Mo and Quinton Jackson. And then third from the top, Tito Ortiz taking on Alexander Shlemenko. Tito has 4 fights on this Bellator deal. Bjorn Rebney has stated publicly, Tito loses, that's it, he's done. This is the fight that I think is most important right now for Tito Ortiz and any kind of longevity in the sport. Is he enough of a hook for people to buy this pay-per-view, knowing that has this guy cried wolf too many times about a return?
Well, it all depends on the type of performance Tito Ortiz has on Saturday night. If he comes out and shows that he can be competitive, even if he loses this fight against Alexander Shlemenko, if he comes out, has a great performance, I would be surprised if Bellator released him. But if Shlemenko comes in, starts kicking that body, and Tito collapses, and Shlemenko ends things in, you know, a minute and a half, yeah, I think Tito would have to hang him up.
Yeah, and this is one of those, you know, make or break for sure. I mean, where do you go after this? Now you're at Bellator. The UFC hates you for life. If Bellator decides to let you go, maybe there's one in the World Series of fighting for you, but I think he needs to go out, take him down, crush him with elbows, have everyone go, oh my God, it's Tito Ortiz, and then be a complete jerk on the microphone, make everybody hate you, call out Rampage Jackson or King Mo. Anything short of that, we'll have to say goodbye to one of the great fighters ever at light heavyweight.
As we look ahead to this Bellator pay-per-view, what is a prediction on how many buys this is going to generate? How many homes do you think are going to spend the money to pay for Bellator? This is a first for Bellator, asking people to pay money to watch their card.
I'm optimistic, and I think people are going to be confused. They're probably still going to think that Eddie Alvarez, Michael Chandler's on this, so I've got my fingers crossed that it's 75,000.
So there's going to be 75,000 people think,
what? What? I think you could see 60,000, I really do. I think 30 to 40,000 would be enough of a victory. They keep doing pay-per-views.
Yeah, I'm hedging it at 50,000 buys. I think that is a relatively good number. Anything above that, I think Bellator should be very happy to enter the market space in pay-per-view and get a good number. We've got more Fight News Now Extra, and it's coming up right now.